So please welcome the Bryson family. And thank you so much for being here with us to teach us about your mission and what you do and how we can get involved. I really appreciate it.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Cody. It's our honor to be with you all this morning. And as Cody mentioned, my name is Kathy, and this is my husband, Dana. And we've lived in Washington State. A little bit about us. We've lived in Washington State for the past 29 years. And we settled into Richland for our hometown. We're members of Kennewick First United Methodist Church. Dana is a retired manager from the Department of Energy. He's been in federal service for 33 years. I'm retired from the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, where I was communications manager for the national security business sector. We've been early response team members since 2010 when the program initially first stood up. We'll talk a little bit more about what early response team or ERTs, we'll talk later about that. But since we've been in with a mission, we have served in Alaska several times, both of us, in Minot, North Dakota. We served in Maryland for Hurricane Sandy, in Texas for Hurricane Harvey, North Carolina twice for Hurricanes Matthew and Florence. We were just last year, we were in Oklahoma, in the Fort Gibson area, serving after the floods there in the Midwest. Dana has served twice in Saipan. We're also going to talk a little bit more about the Saipan missions. A little closer to home, we've served multiple times up in the Okanagan Valley after the 2014 and 15 fires, both in ERT and relief work and in rebuild work. We were in Spokane for a flood response. Port Orchard for the December 2018 tornado. We're also going to talk a little bit more about that. Last spring, we were in Idaho County, a little bit closer to you for the floods there. And most recently in Walla Walla County for the floods that just happened this February. I've been the ERT or the Early Response Team Coordinator since 2015. Dana and I are both UMCOR trainers as well. We've been our conference's disaster response coordinators since 2019, since last year. Dana, you want to talk a little bit more about our missions?
Sure. Our disaster response is grounded in mission. Disaster preparedness and response is a mission and ministry of the church. By being prepared, we're able to help our neighbors and support our communities following disaster. Our mission is supported by our love for God and our neighbors. As Proverbs tells us, commit your works to the Lord and your plans will be established. And you can see one of those pictures where we had a breakfast planning meeting and I didn't notice until partway through the meeting and looked up and saw the writing on the wall. I didn't see a finger writing it, but it was there. And it was appropriate because the Holy Spirit did guide us in new directions that day. Our mission is to love our neighbor as Jesus describes in the Good Samaritan parable in Luke. Our mission focuses our actions. We help people in our communities, our state, our country, and across the world. We respect faith, culture, values. We don't judge, we help everyone. We work cooperatively. Our work is coordinated with community and interfaith partners. We are the positive presence of God's love for all. We act with humility, justice, and peace. Our presence and example are a strong demonstration of our faith. We remember who we are and whose we are. And back to Kathy.
All right, let's take a little closer look at the big picture of disaster response. In general, there's 5 phases in a disaster type of environment. And we start out with the readiness phase. And that's how we are doing our planning phase. It's how we're preparing and getting ready for the emergency or the disaster. And then something happens, the disaster happens. And this is where the rescue phase starts. And it can be going on during and immediately following a disaster. So the rescue does take a bit of time. This is where the public officials come in and provide emergency assistance. It's your first responders, it's police, local EMTs. Following right after the response phase is the relief phase, and we'll talk more about, because this is where our ERT teams come in. The relief phase starts immediately after the rescue, and sometimes can be going on while the rescue phase is still going on. This is the time where work is done to prevent further damage. This is where organizations start to come out and assess the damage and their ability to respond. Following that is the recovery phase. This follows relief, and it continues until systems return to normal or near normalcy. This is where long-term recovery groups start to form to support the rebuild. Following that is the review phase. This is where the agencies involved discuss what happened and try to take their lessons learned to improve for the next time. So, where do the Methodists fit in? We serve in almost every area of the disaster cycle. So just keep in mind, you see these concentric circles, that's because these phases aren't always clear cut. They can be happening at one time while another phase is going on, so that's why they're interconnected. This happens particularly between the relief phase and the recovery phase. And a good example of this was Hurricane Harvey, when you have a massive disaster that's going on in multiple areas across the state. So when a relief is going on and there's basically been some stabilizing done there, the recovery teams are starting to come in one area, and another area of the state still hasn't seen teams that are coming in for support. So in the readiness phase, this happens all the time. We're constantly planning, training, and collaborating with other organizations, developing our best practices going forward. In general, there's a planning tool we use called the Rules of 10 when scoping a disaster period and for planning. So for an example, if an event lasts 3 days, such as a flood event, multiply that by time, and you can plan the relief phase for about 30 days. And that's the kind of the planning area that we use for our ERT teams. Now, if you multiply that again by 10 for the recovery phase, then you can plan about 300 days or almost a year for that rebuild time. So let's take a closer look at how we get involved and how do we serve. So we do that by being the visible presence. We do that by providing a caring Christian presence in the aftermath of a disaster. We do this with our actions and by listening. So the photo on the end shows volunteers with a survivor sifting ashes. There was a lot of sharing and listening going on that day. So on average, this is just an average, it takes a survivor about 32 times to tell their story to help move through the near normal to their near normal. And that's just an average. It takes some people many, many times more, years more. Some people don't need to talk at all about it. So it just depends. So we mainly serve after natural disasters where there's damage to residential properties. But that doesn't mean that the Methodist teams don't respond to other disasters, because we do. We're there. And Dana's going to talk a little bit more later on about how we're responding to our current COVID disaster. So early response teams were first created by the Methodist Church in the 90s, following Hurricane Hugo in 1989 and Andrew in 1993. The program is a cooperative between UMCOR, United Methodist Committee on Relief, and the UMVIMS, United Methodist Volunteers in Mission. ERTs are specially trained, background, badge volunteers in missions. Our teams only deploy with an invitation from the affected conference or jurisdiction. Teams are self-sufficient, trained to use personal protective equipment, and understand safety issues related to the work that they're doing. Our teams are also trained to work with survivors that may have been traumatized by their circumstances. So, what is that work that our ERTs do? We support volunteer and survivors through local and county coordination centers. These photos that you see here are from the Woolsey fire that happened early last year. This is the assistance center that was set up in the Agoura Hills, northwest of Los Angeles. This is where other volunteer organizations were there to help provide their services, and where the survivors come in and connect with those services. We also do site and damage assessments. We perform these assessments on behalf of the organizations that are coordinating the relief efforts. Dana and I teach an advanced site assessment course to help prepare and learn those site assessment skills. We also sort debris and haul a lot of it. We coordinate with the cities or counties to understand how they want it sorted. In some cases, they want it sectioned out, white goods or your refrigerators, the washers and dryers in one area, construction debris in another area, metals in another area. Other counties or cities want it all piled into just one big pile and hauled off. We also need to understand where to put the debris once we section it off, because we don't want to be causing another problem by, in this example, you can actually see a culvert there. We don't want to fill up a culvert and cause another problem. Sometimes we even run after the dump trucks, which in this photo, we are literally chasing down the dump truck with that roll of carpeting. Our goal is to make a residence safe, sanitary, and secure. We tarp roofs. Tarping roofs is a temporary fix to prevent further damage to the home. It's a special skill to handle a tarp that's the size of a roof, where you're standing on a slope and the winds will pick up. We have hands-on training for tarping skills in our advanced classes to help people learn how to do this safely. We clean or muck out, is what it's called, homes. In order to prepare a home for the next step, it has to be cleaned out. We take out floors, remove insulation, take out ceilings, pull out drywall, take ductwork out, anything that's been affected by mold or damage. Afterwards, we also spray the cleaned areas to prevent mold from growing or returning. These are both good examples of mucking out and the proper PPE that's used for that task. Fire responses. We sift and haul ashes and fire debris. You might think there's a little left to do after a fire, but there's a lot that our ERTs can do to help. We sift ashes to find valuable things, and we do find things. We haul debris and sort it for pickup. But the most important thing we do is we listen. We listen to survivors, and we're just there to be present for them. Above all, we strive to do no harm. Do you want to talk a little bit about our chainsaw team?
Sure. Our ERT chainsaw teams remove tree hazards and assure safety at damaged home sites. This is critical to support rebuilding. Here you can see one of our chainsaw teams where we got a little down and dirty in the blackened burn site. We've worked extensively in the Okanagan and Chelan forests to remove hazards in fire damaged areas. Our crews are certified and work together closely to maintain safety. Another one of our response sites, Port Orchard, where an EF2 tornado touched down on December 18, 2018. It was on the ground for approximately 1.4 miles through residential communities with winds of up to 130 miles an hour. Homes and infrastructure were severely damaged from wind and falling trees. It's not something you normally associate with Western Washington. Kitsap County, where it happened, asked us to coordinate volunteer management and assist with community response. You can see one of the town halls we had there. We worked with survivors to identify their unmet needs. We manned the community response center, you can see in the center. And we coordinated with volunteers, other volunteer organizations and corporate partners, and we work to address those unmet needs. You can see to the right where we worked with a corporate partner, Lakeside Industries, to clean up a neighborhood. Another corporate partner, Lowe's, took a day and their employees and resources, and we coordinated with them to do another coordinated cleanup of a neighborhood. And it makes a tremendous difference to the psychology of the people to just get that debris out of the neighborhood and help them return to normal. Partnerships are key to performing our mission. We coordinate with multiple federal, state, county, and nonprofit organizations. FEMA, Washington State Emergency Division, County Emergency Management, Washington and Idaho Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster, or VOADs, and UMCOR, and just a whole slew of initials. Kathy, in fact, is on the Washington VOAD leadership team, where she takes a very active role in their direction. The United Methodist Committee on Relief is a major partner in our mission. There you see UMCOR on the buckets. UMCOR is internationally recognized and provides grants, supplies, guidance, training, and certification. Kathy and I are certified UMCOR trainers, as she said earlier. When disasters strike, we've received UMCOR grants to address immediate needs in Washington and Idaho. UMCOR cleaning kits, as you see in that picture, were distributed to survivors of the Walla Walla flood in February. You might remember donating to support UMCOR on UMCOR Sunday. Local government, churches, companies, and volunteers also respond to disasters. We work with them all. In the pictures, you see where we're working with LDS volunteers. Their energy and strength was very, very welcome for, in this case, our team was a little bit older and they did things like, like hauled a wood stove out of a basement, and I'm not sure my back could have stood that one.
That was wonderful.
And then in the center, you see when we were in Alaska, that's a base camp where you can see the planning map on the wall of a church and the cots on the floor. On the right, it's a fire station in the Outer Banks, where we were actually in a large apartment that the community built on the fire station just for volunteers. And oh man, I worked my tail off there, and I still gained weight because the ladies in the local church fed us so well. As we move into the recovery phase, we transition from ERTs to volunteers in mission to rebuild after the disaster. The PNW conference UMVIM coordinator is Cheryl Reagan. You can see Cheryl cutting some ductwork in the center. On the left, our team was cutting some roofing, metal roofing, putting the roof on a new home. And on the right, you can see they're putting up the walls. And with that, we'll go back to Kathy on Taipan.
I'd like to tell you, share a little bit more about a significant effort that the Methodist connection across the U.S. Has done to serve in Saipan. So Super Typhoon U2 in Saipan made landfall on October 25th of 2018. It was a Category 5 and it caused catastrophic damage. It's the second strongest event to hit US or the territories since 1935. It had gusts to 190 miles an hour. It had 10-minute sustained winds of up to 130 miles an hour. It killed 2 people, 133 people were injured, and it went on to the Philippines to kill 25 people. If you can see that teeny little spot there that says Tinian, the eye of the hurricane actually engulfed the entire island, which was the hardest hit. You know, Saipan and Tinian are US territories that were significant battlegrounds in World War II. 3,000 homes were destroyed. Thousands of people were left homeless. The typhoon choked off tourism, which drives the economy for Saipan. Saipan is also the home to the indigenous Chamorro and many Pacific Island ethnic groups. FEMA and Red Cross were the first in. They set up rescue operations in Saipan. The volunteer organizations followed shortly, including Seventh-day Adventists, Samaritan's Purse, the Baptists, and the Mennonites. FEMA brought in about 1,000 active and reserve military from Guam, Hawaii, and the mainland to do the initial tenting and tarping. And they did that to get people out of the weather. In February of 2019, the military, FEMA phased out the military and started the Valor program, bringing in volunteers. The next steps of roof repair, rebuilding, doors and windows, getting people out of the tents and into their shelters began. So the Mennonites and the Methodists were the primary volunteers for this mission. Since March of last year, there's been 26 Methodist teams comprised of skilled volunteers from across the US that have served in Saipan. Through this March, there were teams actually scheduled to go beyond March, but as we know, that FEMA actually pulled back all of their volunteer activities due to the COVID pandemic. 18 people from the Pacific Northwest from Northwest Conference served about 1,650 hours of volunteer labor during this past year. You can see the picture on the left there is the first team that went in March. And the picture on the right is a pretty typical look of what happened with the roofs after the damage. We were fortunate enough that one of the teams came in, they had a drone. So this is a good example of what it looks like to rebuild a roof there. And you can also see where the roofs were then finished off with tin. There were about 500 homes that needed this type of repair. And here's the same home completed. Dana, you want to talk a little bit about how we go forward?
Sure. In the review phase, we emphasize lessons learned, best practices, and interagency reviews. We strive for continuous improvement through discussions of what went well and what could be improved. This is done daily, at the end of a deployment, and at the end of a project. It's done at all levels, from work crews to interagency reviews. We're also busy in the readiness phase. UMCOR has developed the Connecting Neighbors program to help people, communities, and churches be prepared for disaster. It seeks to inspire congregations and communities to be better able to minimize disaster-caused harm to people and property, and to respond to our neighbors in helpful, cooperative, and caring ways on behalf of the church and in the spirit of Jesus Christ. We offer Connecting Neighbors workshops and support for interested churches using our UMCOR certified trainers. The Connecting Neighbors workshop has 3 main focus areas. Ready Congregants helps you to prepare yourself, prepare your household, and prepare others. Ready Churches focuses on protecting people, protecting property, and anticipating the use of church property in disaster response. Ready Response explores disaster ministries for your church, engaging your church with the community to prepare for disaster response. Connecting Neighbors training and planning supported many churches to be more prepared for responding to the COVID-19 pandemic and taking care of their congregants. The Connecting Neighbors approach is being used as a basis for the Methodist response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We emphasize training in the readiness phase to build skills, prepare people for different situations, and incorporate lessons learned. You see some examples of our training. We use UMCOR certified trainers like Kathy and I. We are ready to serve. The picture shows ERT shower trailers and tool trailers stored at a local fire station, one of our community partners. The shower trailers were procured using an UMCOR grant to allow teams to work in remote areas without shower facilities. The tool trailers were purchased and supplied using local church donations in an UMCOR grant to provide volunteers with the proper tools and equipment to safely work in the disaster area. These capabilities allow us to respond to disasters and serve effectively. Back to you, Kathy.
So we want to thank you for letting us share our time with you and share our mission with you. I just want to point out my favorite picture of all time is the one in the center, and that's from a survivor from the Wolseley fire. And she gave us permission to use her photo and to show that we found, while sifting the ashes, the necklace she wore on her wedding day. And it chokes me up to even say this. So I just want to share that we can't do this alone, that we say there are players, payers, and prayers, and we need all three to serve. So again, thank you for letting us share today with you, and we welcome any questions you might have.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yes, if there are, you can see there's an email that anyone can send any questions beyond today. So go ahead and write that down. That's a good contact info there. I just had a question. So you mentioned, I'm thinking response team, and I'm thinking of a lot of the things that you shared, the cleaning up, the building things, that type of thing. But you kept highlighting also this like listening aspect, this just being there to hear people. And so you talk about training. What kind of training do you give people? Because it sounds like there's like almost like you need a level of can you train in empathy? I don't know, or like, or counseling or whatever. Is that a part of what you do in your training too?
It is, and we have in order to be an ERT member, we have a course that we teach. It's an 8-hour course, and as part of that, we do teach that spiritual and emotional care piece. We go into quite a bit of detail and how to be around survivors and what to expect. So we do training, we do some workshop kind of things. So, but you're right, it is something that comes from within. So. Yeah.
Because I almost like that's part of my job as a pastor. I get that part, but I can also imagine I have people in my congregation who are like, just give me a shovel and let me dig, or let me do this. But the prospect of actually like getting, because this is an emotional moment for people. So I can imagine some congregation members of mine being like, I can handle this hard labor. I don't know about.
Yeah, and I'm kind of like that, and I'll get involved on a wall or a roof, and a survivor will actually seek me out. I don't know why, and want to talk with me. And I need to remind myself, the physical job is secondary. The person, the survivor, is the primary.
I always thought that would be when I first thought about doing this, I thought that would be the most intimidating part. It's actually my favorite part. To be able to work along a survivor and hear their story. Yeah,
that's good. That's good. Okay, so you showed a lot of pictures of some spots that you've been all over the world. Way back at the beginning, or like right after a disaster happens, you've already, you're always in the ready stage or the preparedness stage. But right after a disaster happens, you don't just show up, right? I mean, do you have to be contacted by? I mean, how do you know when it's right to go in other words, like how's that process?
We're invited to go in, and that's a really good point, Cody. Thanks for bringing that up. So it depends on where the disaster is. We do it through our Methodist connection. Okay. So we don't go into an area unless we've been invited in by that conference or that jurisdiction and then conference. So we always stay within our connection. And the same if a disaster happens here. We are the coordinators if something is here, and then we determine if we can serve locally with our teams here. And if we need to reach out, then we put out a request for other teams to come in. So that is how we go out as well.
Okay. And then, so how about even locally? Do you just, again, do you just show up if you know like this is in our area, or is it like, does the government contact you, county response teams or anything? Who kicks it off? Yeah.
First call is you.
Oh, okay.
The call that we make is to the pastor.
Okay.
And so the pastors are our local connections,
Mm.
and to find out how your church is, how your congregation is, how
Okay.
the community is, and then go beyond that. So we start with it starts with you.
Awesome. That's cool. Yeah. I imagine that after a response, there's probably quite a few groups of people. Well, it probably depends on the area, but there's probably several groups that are like, yeah, let's go help. And then I just am picturing all these people showing up with no organization, and you know what I mean? That probably doesn't happen anymore. Oh, does it? Does it happen?
Oh,
like that?
oh yes.
Oh,
It does.
no. Okay.
Yes, it does. And we coordinate, as we said earlier. So once we are coordinated within our connection, then we wait for an invitation either from the city. Usually it's the county. Dana had mentioned Kitsap County.
Yeah.
Invited us to come in and start working with their community response center. We were invited in, for example, Idaho County. We worked with Idaho County emergency manager, and he invited us to come in. We did damage assessments there, and then did some ERT work. So we do stay connected. The other way we stay connected is through our VOAD, the volunteer organizations active in disasters. So we connect on a lot of levels before we go in. We go in ready. So
awesome. Okay, so this question is specifically about the kind of like the COVID-19 stuff. So a disaster happens, and then there's the after. So you show up and you clean. But right now, this is just something that's just like. Is there an end to it? I don't know. Like this seems so much different than any other type of response that you would, any situation you'd respond to. So how have you had to shift gears, I guess, for this response?
That's where our Connecting Neighbors program is very important, where we talk to churches and ask to come in and share the Connecting Neighbors program and work with you to figure out what is right for your church and congregation. And it goes from understanding how you take care of yourselves to what mission above and beyond you want to take on and be able to do. And having that base allows you to understand how you can take care of your community and your congregants.
And we have some Connecting Neighbors materials up specifically for the COVID response. It's up on the Greater Northwest Episcopal website. And we're also in a planning stage now of what it's going to look like, what, reimagining disaster response, what it's going to look like going forward. So we're in that planning stage now.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
And of course, working with within our connection in the conference.
Yeah. Because I can imagine,
in the planning for reopening your church as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're having to tackle all the questions that probably every church is, distancing, singing, all that. I hadn't thought about, in the middle of this, if there's a disaster, you're going to be working elbow to elbow with folks. Yeah. But you still got to keep each other safe. Man, I didn't think about that.
Yeah, we're in those, and we're thinking and praying and planning.
Wow. That's crazy. Okay, so we have a question from Matthew. He wants to know what other disaster relief groups that you've worked with are a delight to work with.
Oh.
I love working with the Mennonites. I've lived and worked with the Mennonites, and I have very close friends in the Northwest. I love working with them. The Baptists feed you wonderfully. I love when the Baptists show up because they usually bring a kitchen, and they have a very, very good chainsaw group that I respect highly.
That's awesome.
We love them all. But those two organizations are ones that we've worked close, along with the Church of Jesus Christ in our area. We've worked closely. They were wonderful to work with up in the Spokane area.
Awesome. Very cool.
Thanks, Matthew, for that.
I'm glad he put a nice positive spin on it and didn't ask, you to be on the spot about who you don't like working with. I'm not gonna.
No, we like them all.
Okay. All right. Good. Yeah. So how about for a member? Let's say a member of my church were to pop up and be like, I want to help. Maybe I'm too, maybe I'm not able-bodied enough to show up. What can a person do? You mentioned the prayer. I know they can pray. Is there something else they can do?
There are, like we said, they can pray for us. There's also ways to support financially to our organization and to the particular event. Bishop Elaine has set up special advances for certain disasters, and that's a wonderful way to channel those funds through us. And go ahead, Dana.
And don't rule yourself out on the training, because we have the training on how to do this, but some people can go in and rip out drywall and do all the heavy lifting, but some people, we have one position on our team that is a listener recorder who is specialized in that. Everyone works, but we have these different positions. Also, our ERT teams are the ones that go in and man the community response centers. And phone trees, and there are a wide range of jobs that can be done, and not all of them take a strong back.
That's very cool. Yep, absolutely. So a listener and a recorder, is that, is for any one of your responses, or is there is it a historian, somebody who records?
Yes. We have assigned positions. We have actually, and we talk about this in the training, there's 7 defined positions, and the listener recorder is one of them. And we take notes every day, and like we mentioned, the highs, the lows, and managing paperwork. And also it's someone who may have a special skill, maybe a Stevens minister, a lacer, that can talk to a survivor. So sometimes we have clergy, we have retired clergy, we have a lot of folks that enjoy that particular role.
So we may try and funnel people to talk with the survivor, but ultimately it's the survivor who determines who they want to talk to, and they do.
Right. That's awesome. Well, Dana and Kathy, thank you so much for joining us today. I got to run and get set up for worship, of course, but I so appreciate you sharing your time and your ministry with us and how we can get involved. Everyone tuning in, please note their email there, but also, is there a website someone can go to just learn a bit more? I think you mentioned a couple times.
Our conference website, PNW, the Pacific Northwest, UMC.org.
Yep, pnwumc.org.
Yep. Our disaster response page.
Awesome. Well, very cool. Thank you so much. Thank you for the work that you're doing and just being faithful and being a presence in all of our communities here. We love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
All righty.
See you later. Bye. Thanks everyone for joining in, and see you next week.